if you were representing Deshaun, or if you needed more information, like, what would be his defense here if these cases keep filing up? Like, how does he try and, prove his innocence, essentially?
Well, one thing that's very critical when it comes to looking at these lawsuits versus somebody who is, arrested and charged by the state is, if you're charged as a criminal defendant, Jake, the proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest burden of proof in law, right? And because if we're taking away someone's freedom, we want to be really sure that we're correct. These are civil lawsuits, which means the burden of proof is different. They are preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. So it's a lower burden of proof for the plaintiff to win. I think as far as a defense, this is, and Deshaun Watson hired Rusty Hardin yesterday, which I thought was a really smart move because, Rusty has defended Roger Clemens successfully against the federal government. Like, that is not easy to do. The government usually wins on almost all of their cases. And Rusty has dealt with professional athletes in many capacities in the law. And so I think he'll understand that this is as much of a PR battle as it is going to be a legal battle. There are 6 lawsuits, and so I'm not entirely sure like which specific defenses he might apply to different circumstances. But one overarching thing that Rusty Hardin might do whenever he holds a press conference or wherever he does from a media standpoint is, I think it might be worthy for him to point out, like, listen, if you go back and you look at NFL players who have been suspended or had issues, Ezekiel Elliott, Ben Roethlisberger, in some capacity, and when I say this, Jake, just know, I don't know what truly happened between Deshaun Watson and any of these plaintiffs. I've read the first 3 of these complaints so far, the first 3 of the lawsuits. But one thing that Rusty might do is say, hey, why weren't the police involved in any of these? Why has there never been, apparently, a single phone call to the police? Why have there been no actual tangible accusations? Why is my client being sued in district court in Harris County where the only remedy is monetary damages? I don't know if he's going to make that argument in court because you have 6 different plaintiffs, but that I wonder if that's something that he might play up in the court of public opinion.
Mike, what do you say to those that question the timing of all these allegations coming out against Deshaun with everything going on between him and his trade request with the Texans?
Well, it depends, Jake, on what they mean by questioning the timing. Like, if you're trying to somehow link the team to these lawsuits, I think that's preposterous. It does not benefit the Houston Texans in any way to have 6 lawsuits filed against their starting quarterback, whether they're keeping him or whether they're trading him, right? Like, it does not benefit them in any way. As far as timing, like, yes, timing is a significant part of filing lawsuits depending on who you're filing against. So if I'm somebody like Tony Buzbee, then yeah, timing of lawsuits is going to be something that you're thinking about because you want to exert maximum leverage on the defendant to quickly settle out of court, right? So I don't think it's an accident that he is filing these lawsuits as free agency is underway, as we are a month and a half or so until the NFL draft. Like, from a Tony Buzbee standpoint, he wants to have these lawsuits at a time in the news cycle where Deshaun Watson would be incentivized to say, let me quickly get rid of all 6 lawsuits. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Mike Meltser with us here, Sirius XM, Mad Dog Radio, longtime Houston sports radio personality, and also an attorney-at-law. So perfect to talk about everything going on with Deshaun Watson. What do you know about Tony Buzbee? It seems like he's obviously a very prominent attorney. I've heard some come out and say, he's an attention-seeking guy. What do you know from what you've heard? Maybe some of your, lawyer peers. What have people said about Tony Buzbee, who's representing all the plaintiffs?
Well, he's definitely one of the most well-known attorneys in Houston. He unsuccessfully ran for mayor about a year or 2 ago. He's a big plaintiff's attorney who is going to advertise, who is going to seek publicity because that's a lot of the way he makes money. I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm just saying that as reality. I remember Tony spoke at my orientation at the University of Houston Law Center, and I kind of had the feeling listening to Tony's stories, I'm like, whatever Tony does for his clients, I'm sure is great, but I couldn't really see myself ever working for him. So different strokes for different folks. I think it's interesting that he's clearly playing the social media game. I was first alerted to this. It's Thursday morning. I first heard about this on Tuesday night when Tony posted, "Hey, I'm about to file this case and a few more cases against Deshaun Watson." And he's really playing up, hey, professional athlete, assault, sexual assault, the NFL condones this behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's really playing up, that angle of it. And there is a part of me that, the way I like to do things is say less and show more. And so I wouldn't love the idea of trying to argue my cases on Instagram as Tony has done. But it's a tactical strategy, I think, to draw more attention to these lawsuits and ultimately exert maximum leverage upon Watson.
In Watson's statement that he put out on Twitter the other night, he wrote, "The plaintiff's lawyer claims that it isn't about money, but before filing suit, he made a baseless six-figure settlement demand, which I quickly rejected." What do you make of Watson's retort there? Is this about money, even though Busby claims it's not? Like, what is the end goal here for Busby by, taking on all these cases representing the plaintiffs?
Well, here's the thing. I struggle with statements like it's not about the money, because the only thing you can get, you can get a temporary injunction, down at the courthouse, but that doesn't really apply to this. Like, the only thing that you can really get there is money. Like, it's the only thing you can really sue for, essentially, like, in this kind of litigation. You could say, well, this is about justice, and one could make that argument just depending on what exactly happened in these matters. One thing I do wonder, Jake, so once Deshaun Watson releases a statement, it kind of gives more legitimacy to the entire series of stories. Before, it's just, okay, there's been a lawsuit filed against Watson. Well, nobody knows how credible the lawsuit is or isn't, but once the defendant makes a statement, it's like, okay, this is something. We found out Watson hired Rusty Hardin yesterday. His statement was released the night before. Rusty's really good at the public relations side, and I think he'd want to take control of it. I'd be curious if Rusty would have advised Deshaun Watson to release that statement or any statements before representing him. One other thing I do want to add, Jake, you haven't asked me this yet, but I just want to mention this because ultimately, like, we don't know what happened in these situations. There's accusations about an incident in March 2020, late August 2020, and then late December 2020. One of the things about these cases is that the plaintiffs are going to have to show proof, right? And none of us know exactly what happened. I found it interesting that the first case referred to Watson reaching out to the masseuse via Instagram direct messages and then texting her. And in the second lawsuit, there was an allegation that Watson flew the masseuse from Atlanta to Houston, and the massage was performed at the Houstonian Hotel. All of these things are things that have some kind of paper trail. There would be some kind of documentation to where if these things actually exist in the way they're set out in the lawsuits by Tony Busby, it gives more credibility if the documentation shows exactly what Tony Busby wrote about. Like, even though the documentation is not going to tell us what happened in those rooms, if what they're saying is in the messages is actually in the messages, it gives more credibility to each individual plaintiff.